pour yourself back into that first cup of coffee from 40 years ago. Same beans, more or less. Same ritual. You still fill the kettle the same way, still wait for that little click, still pour it over the grounds and watch the water darken. But somewhere along the way, that cup stopped roaring at you the way it used to. It used to fill the whole kitchen before you even took a sip. That dark, toasted, almost chocolatey cloud that used to hit you from 3 feet away and wake something up in your chest before the caffeine ever touched your blood. Now you lean in a little closer to the mug just to catch a hint of it. And even then, some mornings, it just smells like hot water with a rumor of coffee behind it. You tell yourself the brand changed, or the water's different, or maybe you're just imagining things. And then it happens again at dinner. The orange you peel out of habit, the one that used to spray a fine mist of citrus into the air the second your thumbnail broke the skin, filling the room with something so sharp and bright, it almost stung your eyes a little. That same orange today just tastes like sweet water with a faint idea of orange hiding somewhere inside it. Or maybe it's your mother's pot roast, the one you've made from her handwritten recipe 100 times, the one that used to announce itself down the hallway before you even opened the front door. You make it exactly the same way, and it still tastes fine. It's just quieter now, softer around the edges. Like someone turned the volume down on the whole meal by a notch or two, and nobody told you, and nobody can turn it back up. Most people, when this starts happening to them, reach for the obvious explanation, and it's a perfectly reasonable one on the surface. They figure it must be the tongue. Papillae wearing out, taste buds going dull with age, the whole apparatus just tired from 70 or 80 years of chewing and swallowing and sipping hot coffee that was probably too hot. It feels like it should be the tongue. The tongue is right there, doing the obvious work every time you eat, so when the experience of eating starts to fade, it's the natural suspect to blame. And here's the surprising part, your tongue is mostly not the problem. Your taste buds do change a little over a lifetime, and things like dry mouth, certain medications, and dental health can play a role too. But the tongue itself holds up better than most people assume, and it isn't the main reason your food went quiet. The bigger part of the story isn't happening on your tongue at all. It's happening a few inches above it and behind it, tucked up behind the bridge of your nose, in a small space you've probably never thought about once in your entire life. That's where the volume knob really sits. And once you understand what's up there, quietly losing a little of its edge over the decades, this whole mystery of your muted meals starts to make sense, and starts to feel like something you can actually work with. So let's take apart what we actually mean when we say a food tastes like something, because most of us have been using that word a little carelessly our whole lives. What your tongue does, on its own, is surprisingly narrow. Those little bumps you can see if you stick your tongue out and look in a mirror are called papillae, and tucked down inside them are microscopic taste buds. Between all of them, they can really only report back 5 basic sensations: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and the newer one that took scientists a while to formally recognize, umami, that deep, savory, almost meaty richness you get from a good broth or a ripe tomato or aged cheese. That's the entire menu your tongue can offer on its own. 5 notes. That's it. No matter how elaborate the dish in front of you, your tongue by itself can only tell you some combination of those 5 things, in different proportions, at different intensities. Layered on top of that, there's texture and temperature, which your mouth reports through an entirely different set of nerves. The creaminess of good butter, the snap of a fresh green bean, the way ice cream feels cold and a fresh biscuit feels warm, the pleasant resistance of a well-cooked steak against your teeth. And there's one more player in this whole system that people almost never think about, and that's your trigeminal nerve, the same nerve that gives you that sharp, burning sting when you bite into a hot pepper, or the cool, almost tingling rush you get from a strong piece of peppermint or a swig of something minty. That burn isn't a taste. A chili pepper does have real tastes of its own, but the heat itself isn't one of them. What you're feeling there is your trigeminal nerve reacting to a chemical compound the way it would react to actual heat, sending a very real, very physical alarm signal straight to your brain. Same with the icy coolness of mint. That's not a flavor either. It's a nerve responding to a chemical as if the temperature itself had dropped. So already you can see that flavor, the rich, full experience you get when you eat something you love, is being built out of several completely different systems working together at once. And this next part catches almost everyone off guard the first time they hear it, and it's really the whole heart of what we're talking about today. Researchers who study this for a living will tell you that most of what you experience as flavor, the majority of that rich, textured, unmistakable sense of, oh, that's my mother's pot roast, or that's this specific brand of coffee, most of that isn't coming from your tongue at all. It's coming from your sense of smell. Your nose is doing far more of the actual work of flavor than your tongue ever gets credit for. Take away your sense of smell entirely, and even with a perfectly healthy tongue, food turns into something strangely flat. You'd still be able to tell sweet from salty, bitter from sour. But the specific, recognizable, unmistakable identity of a food, the fact that this particular thing in front of you is coffee and not tea, is your mother's pot roast and not just any beef stew, is a Florida orange and not a lemon, nearly all of that comes from smell. Now, to really understand why your nose can fall quiet while nothing seems to be happening to your nose, you need to understand something most people never learn, which is that there are actually two completely different roads that smell can travel down to reach your brain. The first one is the road everybody already knows about, and that's orthonasal smell, the ordinary business of sniffing something from the outside. You lift a cup of coffee to your face and breathe in before you drink, and the aroma travels up through your nostrils the normal way, straight in through the front door. That's orthonasal smell, and it works exactly the way you'd expect it to. But there's a second road, a back door, and this is the one doing most of the real work. It's called retronasal smell, and it happens entirely inside your own head while you're chewing without you ever consciously sniffing anything at all. Picture what actually unfolds. The instant you put a bite of food into your mouth and start chewing, your chewing and your saliva and the warmth of your mouth all work together to release tiny aroma molecules out of that food. Instead of drifting out toward your nostrils, those molecules rise up the back of your throat, through a passage that connects the very back of your mouth to the inside of your nasal cavity, and they reach your smell receptors from behind, from the inside, as you breathe out through your nose while chewing. That pathway, mouth to throat to the back door of your nose, is retronasal smell, and it is doing the overwhelming majority of the work every single time you eat something and think, now that has flavor. It's the reason a stuffy nose during a bad cold makes food taste like cardboard even though your tongue hasn't changed one bit. The front door and the back door are both blocked, and the flavor, which was mostly living in your nose the whole time, simply has nowhere to go. So here's where age actually enters the picture, and it's a very different story than most people assume. Your taste buds, the ones living on your tongue, do decline a little as the decades go by. But by and large, they hold up remarkably well. They're a relatively tough, resilient system. The steeper decline, the one that quietly does most of the damage to how rich your meals feel, happens up in that smell system behind your nose, the retronasal doorway we just talked about, and the machinery just past it. Your sense of smell begins with a patch of specialized receptor neurons sitting high up inside your nasal cavity, and these cells have a remarkable trait that almost no other neurons in your entire body share. Throughout most of your life, they actually regenerate. They wear out from ordinary use, from breathing polluted air, from the occasional cold or infection, and your body replaces them over and over, cycle after cycle, for decades. It's one of the few places in your nervous system that keeps rebuilding itself on a regular basis. But as the years accumulate, that regeneration process starts to slow down and becomes a little less complete each time, so the population of healthy, fully functioning receptor cells up there gradually thins out. Even though your nose looks and works exactly the same from the outside. Behind that patch of receptors sits a small structure called the olfactory bulb, which is essentially the very first relay station where smell signals arrive in your brain, the first place where all those chemical messages get sorted and interpreted before being sent onward. And research suggests this little structure tends to lose some of its volume with age, the same general way other parts of the brain can. Researchers think that's likely one part of the picture, not the whole of it. A smaller relay station, sorting the same steady flood of incoming smell signals, may handle the job with a little less precision than it once did. And then there's simple accumulated exposure, a lifetime's worth of it. Every cold and flu you've ever had, every sinus infection, every whiff of exhaust or paint fumes or cigarette smoke you've breathed over 60, 70, 80 years, every medication that's passed through your system, it all adds up quietly on that same delicate patch of tissue high in your nose. None of it is dramatic on its own. It's cumulative, the way sunlight slowly fades a curtain that's been hanging in the same window for decades. No single day did the damage. The years did. Put the slower regeneration, the shrinking relay station, and the lifetime of accumulated wear together, and you get a pattern researchers have given a name to, Presbyosmia, which simply means age-related smell loss, the smell system's equivalent of the reading glasses most of us eventually need. It tends to become noticeably more common as people move through their 70s, and researchers who study aging populations will often tell you it's one of the more common, if quietly under-discussed, changes that comes with a long life. It isn't a disease, and it isn't something you did wrong. Think of it instead as the natural wear pattern of a hardworking system that's been running without a day off since before you can remember. There's a second piece to this puzzle, and this one is genuinely hopeful because unlike the slow decline of receptor cells, it's something that can often be influenced, sometimes quite a lot. It has to do with saliva. Every one of those taste molecules sitting on your food. The sweetness in a strawberry, the saltiness of a cracker, has to dissolve into saliva before your taste buds can even detect it. Taste buds don't respond to solid food directly. They respond to a dissolved chemical solution bathing over them, and saliva is what makes that solution. A dry mouth, then, doesn't just feel uncomfortable. It genuinely muffles taste at the source, the same way a radio station comes through weaker when the signal itself is weak, no matter how good your radio is. And here's the encouraging part. Dry mouth in people over 60 is very often not really about age itself at all. It's overwhelmingly a side effect of medications. Blood pressure pills, antihistamines, antidepressants, and dozens of other common prescriptions can reduce saliva production as a side effect nobody warns you enough about. That means for a lot of people, some of what feels like food doesn't taste like it used to may have less to do with your nose or your tongue, and more to do with a dry mouth that a doctor or pharmacist could actually help with, simply by looking at what's in your medicine cabinet. Now here's a pattern worth understanding, because it explains something a lot of families notice without ever quite putting their finger on why. When your sense of smell starts to fade, it doesn't fade evenly. The delicate stuff goes first, the subtle layered aromas, the faint background notes, the kind of complexity that made a homemade soup taste different from a can, or a good tomato taste different from a mediocre one. Those quiet, complicated notes are the first casualties. What survives the longest, what keeps coming through loud and clear even as everything else softens, are the loud, simple signals your tongue still delivers well on its own, with little help from your nose, salt and sweet. So without ever quite deciding to, a lot of people start reaching for a little more salt on everything, a little more sugar in the coffee, a little more sauce, a little more seasoning, often just because that's become one of the few ways the meal still registers as having much flavor at all. It's worth simply knowing this about yourself and noticing the pattern in your own kitchen. And if you have your blood pressure to think about and you catch yourself reaching for the salt shaker more and more, that's a good thing to bring up with your doctor. Because once you understand where that extra reach is really coming from, it stops being a battle of willpower and becomes something you can manage wisely. There's another quiet job your sense of smell does that's easy to forget about entirely, because it usually works so well in the background that you never have to think about it. And that's keeping you safe. Smell is your early warning system. It's what tells you the milk has gone bad before you take a mouthful. It catches a whiff of smoke from another room long before you ever see a flame. And it picks up gas from a stove left slightly on, or food quietly spoiling in the back of the refrigerator. When that scent starts to fade gradually, those warnings can start arriving fainter too, or later than they used to, or sometimes not at all. This isn't meant to alarm you. It's simply worth knowing, the same way you'd want to know that your smoke detector's batteries need checking every so often. A little awareness here. Maybe leaning a little more on expiration dates, maybe making sure the smoke detectors in the house are working well and checked regularly goes a long way toward covering for a system that may not be shouting as loudly as it once did. And here's the genuinely hopeful part, because this isn't a story about decline with no way to respond to it. Your olfactory system, more than almost any other sense you have, seems to respond to being used. Nothing here is a miracle cure, and nobody can promise you the coffee of your 20s back. But there's some real encouraging research behind what scientists call smell training. In its formal version, it's a structured practice, deliberately sniffing the same small set of strong, familiar scents every day on purpose over weeks and months. The evidence for it is promising, though still limited, and most of it comes from people working to recover a lost sense of smell rather than from aging alone. Still, the gentle everyday cousin of it costs you nothing. Instead of letting eating happen on autopilot, actually lift the food a little closer before a bite and breathe in on purpose. Notice what's there. Try to name it, even just to yourself. Is that cinnamon? Is that garlic? Is that the sharpness of black pepper? That small, repeated act of paying attention may help keep the pathway between your nose and your brain a little more engaged. The way almost anything used regularly tends to stay sharper than something left completely idle. It isn't a proven treatment, just a kind, low-cost habit that fits the way this system seems to like being used. Chewing slowly matters here too, more than people realize. Remember, retronasal smell, That backdoor pathway doing most of the real work of flavor depends entirely on aroma molecules being released from food as you chew and rising up through the back of your throat. Wolf a meal down in 5 distracted minutes in front of the television, and you're cutting that release process short before it ever gets going properly. Slow down, chew a little more thoroughly, and you give those aroma molecules more time and more opportunity to actually make that trip up to where they can be detected. It sounds almost too simple to matter, but it genuinely does. Variety helps too, in a very direct, physical way. Eating the same handful of foods on rotation, week after week, year after year, means your smell receptors are essentially getting the same narrow set of chemical signals over and over, while whole other families of aroma molecules go completely unused. Branching out, a spice you don't normally reach for, a fruit you haven't had since it was in season last year, an herb you've never really cooked with, gives your olfactory system genuinely new material to work with, which seems to help keep more of that receptor population active and engaged rather than letting large parts of it sit dormant. And here's a small, almost delightfully practical detail. Warm food releases far more aroma than cold food does. Heat makes those volatile aroma molecules more active, more eager to escape into the air and up into your nose. And that's a big reason a dish fresh off the stove can smell like heaven, while the same dish pulled cold from the refrigerator barely registers at all. If a meal has gone quiet on you, something as simple as making sure it's properly warm before you eat it, rather than lukewarm or reheated half-heartedly, can genuinely bring some of that lost dimension back. And staying well hydrated, taking care of that saliva we talked about earlier, keeps the whole dissolving and detecting system running the way it's meant to. None of this is a cure. Think of it less as fixing something broken and more as simply giving a hard-working, aging system the conditions it needs to keep doing its job as well as it still can. There's one more distinction that really matters, and it's worth holding on to separately from everything else. Everything we've described so far, the slow fading, the year-by-year softening of aromas, the gradual reach for a little more salt, that's the ordinary, gradual story of a body that simply lived a long time. The same unhurried way hair goes gray or eyesight shifts. That kind of slow change is normal, and it's not something to be frightened of. But a sudden loss of smell or taste is an entirely different matter, and it deserves a different response. If flavor disappears abruptly, over the course of days rather than years, or if a strong cold seems to take your sense of smell with it and it simply never comes back the way it used to, that's not the same story we've been telling today, and it's worth bringing to your doctor rather than waiting it out. There are a number of possible explanations for a sudden change like that, some simple and some worth looking into properly, and a conversation with a physician is the right next step, not a guess made alone at the kitchen table. And as we said, if you have blood pressure concerns and notice yourself leaning on the salt shaker more and more, that's worth bringing to your doctor too, rather than quietly managing it on your own. There's a quiet dignity in realizing that your nose has been doing this much work, this softly, for your whole life, without you ever once thinking to thank it. Every meal you've loved, every kitchen that felt like home the moment you walked in, every cup of coffee that ever felt like the start of a good morning, your nose was doing most of that the whole time, tucked behind the bridge of your face, never asking for credit. And it's still doing it today, just a little more softly than it used to. The real gift in understanding any of this isn't getting the old intensity back exactly as it was. It's remembering to pay attention while you eat, to lean in over that cup of coffee on purpose, to really notice the orange as you peel it, to treat a good meal less like fuel and more like something worth meeting halfway, because it's still very much there. If today's story got you thinking a little differently about your own kitchen table, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you'd like more of these gentle, honest walks through what really goes on inside the body as it ages, come along and subscribe. I'll be right here, ready to look at the next one with you.